Welcome to this video. Great to see you back in this mini series. In the last videos you learned what Firebase Cloud Functions are and how to create a cloud function that listens to changes in our Firebase storage. In this video we'll listen to HTTP events, hence actually creating our own API. Let's dive into that. So let's add a new cloud function. Here is the cloud function I created in the last video, the one which reacts on storage events. Now I'll export a new function here with exports and then the function name. And I will name this one here upload file. I'll use the functions object here, which we get from the Firebase Functions package. And I will use the HTTPS realm to listen to HTTPS events. There we have onRequest, and onRequest then also takes a function that gets executed. And this gets executed whenever an HTTP request reaches this endpoint, and you'll get the exact URL once you deployed it. This object here actually will hold a request and a response object, as you know it from Express apps, Node Express. So in there, we can now do something. We should absolutely send a response. That's the bare minimum. So what we can do here is we can send a status code of 200 with maybe some JSON data where we output a message. It worked. And you could also send HTML here. It doesn't have to be JSON data. And if this is a syntax you don't know, it's probably worth looking into some Node Express tutorials because I'll essentially be using the same syntax and language here. So with that, I'm sending a response. And now, why don't we just try it out? This is a basic HTTP function, cloud function, which we can trigger by sending a request to it. So let me run Firebase deploy in our project here to put this back into Firebase and create a function with this upload file function we just defined. And then let's see how we can trigger that. Deployment finished. And now if you expand the console here or scroll up, you will see where your functions are deployed to. And for HTTPS functions, you'll get the endpoint you have to send a request to. So I'll copy that URL here. And then I'll simply open Postman. That is a tool that allows you to send HTTP requests, to any endpoint you want, essentially. In there, I'll enter the URL, and I won't set any special headers or a body. I'll just send a GET request, and it's sent. And now this gives me indeed back some JSON data. It worked with status code 200. So this shows that it works. And we can also send a post request to this endpoint. We get back the same response. If we only want to handle some HTTP verbs and not all of them, we have to do this in this endpoint. By default, it handles all incoming requests. So now we could say we just want to handle post requests. So we could check if request method, if this is not equal to post. If it is not equal, then I will return a response with maybe status code 500 and set JSON to pass an object where the message is not allowed or whatever you want. So with that, I updated this. Now I can deploy it again and the URL is going to stay the same. And as you already see, I'm using the same syntax you use in a normal Node Express project because Firebase Cloud Functions for HTTP events use Node Express behind the scenes. So you can use the same syntax and the same packages for Node Express project. So that's pretty cool. So this is something to keep in mind. You can really build your Node Express project in a RESTful way and on a per endpoint basis with Cloud Functions. You can simply write any logic here, which you would normally put in one of your routes in the Node Express project you might be building. So let's wait for this to finish and let's then try this out. Deployment finished. It's worth waiting a couple of milliseconds or half a minute or something like that to really make sure that the function change propagated and you really reach the right endpoint. And then if you try again and you send a post request, you should get it worked. And if you send a GET request, you get not allowed. So now we make sure only post requests trigger this. Now the idea behind the function is not just to send back some dummy data. I actually want to accept some data, some form data, let's say, so a mixture of a file and some fields, which I can put onto cloud storage. For this, I first of all want to ensure that CORS is enabled, so cross-site origin resource sharing. To make sure that also apps that do not live on the same server as this function will be hosted on, so basically all apps, that also these apps are able to send HTTP requests to this backend. Now, for Postman, this is not important because Postman is not a browser. It doesn't check for whether CORS is allowing this access. But in a browser, if you send some AJAX request, you typically have the issue that the server has to enable CORS. So basically has to allow you to access the resource even though your web app might not be running on the same origin, not on the same server. So I want to allow that. And for that, I will install a new package. So navigate into the functions folder. And with npm install -- save, I'll install the CORS package. Now this is a Node Express package we can use to conveniently set some headers we need to send back to the client to allow this cross-origin access. And with that installed, I'll import it here, CORS, require CORS. This is executed as a function, and I pass an object to that function where I set origin to true to set up these CORS headers for this origin correctly. And then I will actually wrap my entire code here with this CORS middleware. So I will execute CORS as a function here. And this function takes 3 arguments: request, response, and then the function should execute after it basically added its own headers to the request and response. So I will forward request and response here, and then execute a function where I also get request and response, and where I then will simply put the code I previously had, well, in my Cloud Function itself. So now it's wrapped by this CORS middleware, and therefore it sends the right headers to allow cross-origin access. Since I renamed this in this anonymous function here to request and response, I should also return response status in both cases now to have this work correctly again. With that, we added CORS. We still don't really accept form data. We're not able to do anything with incoming files. So that's the next step I want to take. And to accept such file uploads and then store them on Firebase storage, I need 2 things. I need one package that parses the incoming request body for form data and then gives me convenient access to the files and the fields I might have added. And I need access to my Firebase storage, which I already can do or can access with my Google Cloud storage package there. So we already got this at least. Now for parsing that incoming request body, I'll use a package named busboy, which is a package that is able to handle incoming form data. So I'll again navigate into that functions folder and run npm install -- save busboy, like that. And then once this is installed, we'll navigate back into the main directory and I'll import busboy from the busboy package, like this. And then I'll go into my CORS wrapper, and after I checked the method of the request, I'll create a new busboy instance with new busboy, and I'll pass an object to it where I simply forward the headers. So set the headers property to request headers. This is required to, well, allow busboy to find out whether the incoming request is of type form data or not, so if it should parse it or not. With that, I'll use this busboy object and add the on listener, and I'll listen to file events. These will be triggered whenever busboy successfully parses a file from the incoming request. In this case, we would get an event, a method that gets executed, a function, which receives the field name in which the file was stored, the file itself, the name of the file, the encoding of the file, and the MIME type. This function gets executed for every file detected in the request reaching this endpoint. Now I'm only interested in files. If you wanted to also get fields, you would add a busboy on field listener. Now fields is anything but a file, so extra information you add with the request. Since we're sending form data, it can be a mixture of a file and extra fields. I'm only interested in the file though. So once we got a file, what's the plan? The plan is to store it in Firebase storage, right? So what I'll do here is I'll construct a path to the file by using path join which I already used in the last video, where I get the temporary directory of this cloud function. There is a little temporary cloud storage attached to the cloud function. It will be cleaned up whenever the execution is done, essentially. But during the execution, you can use it to store files. And Busboy will store it in some temp directory, will store that incoming file there. So I'll access the temp directory and get my file there. So I'm constructing a path to the file which Busboy extracted. And then I will create some variable here, which I'll name upload data, which initially is null. I do this outside of busboy on. Inside of busboy on file, I'll then set upload data to an object, a JavaScript object, where I will set my file to the file path I created here, and where I set the type to the MIME type busboy detected. Now, why do I set it up like this in a variable? Because now I will leave this busboy on function here and add another one, busboy on finish. Busboy on simply triggers whenever it found a file, but finish triggers once it is done parsing the entire request. This is when I want to upload the data. So here in this handler function, I now want to use Google Cloud Storage to upload. So I'll create a bucket object here and use GCS bucket to do that, to get a reference to that bucket. And now I want to get my default bucket for this Firebase account. You can get this easily by visiting your storage. And there it's basically this name without the GS : / at the beginning. This is what I'll pass here. This is my default bucket. This is the bucket into which I want to store the file. Now with that reference created, I can trigger bucket upload, call that method, pass my file, and that is why I got this upload data object here, where I have a file property which holds a path to the file. So now I can pass upload data file here, which is that path to the file I want to upload. Then I can pass a JavaScript object where I will set the upload type to media and set the metadata field to hold another metadata field where I will set the content type to the upload data type, so the content type we originally detected. You could add more metadata to the uploaded file, of course. Now, at some point of time, upload will be done, and it either returns us an error or some information about the uploaded file. Now, if we got an error, I want to return a response with status code 500 and some JSON object where I essentially pass on the error object. But if we don't make it into this if statement, so if we don't have an error, then I know that we successfully uploaded the file, and then I will take my original response and remove it from the end of that file and put it into this then block here. And with that, we should have a setup where we can upload a file through a HTTP request. So let's try it out. Let's go into the root project folder and run Firebase deploy. And let's then see if we can successfully send a foreign data request with a file in it to our backend here, and then store that in Firebase Cloud Storage. And then it should actually also trigger our resize function, which we wrote in the last video. So let's see if that both is the case. The deployment is done here. Again, don't rush this. It takes some time to propagate that new endpoint to the web. So I'll go back to Postman, and now I will go to body of my post request. Make sure to set this to foreign data, and then add a file here. Give this any name you want, like image, and choose a file, of course. I'll take the winter image we used before. Now, this is the request I want to send. So let me hit send here. And I actually get back an error, could not handle the request. Let's have a look at our Firebase Functions log here. So on Firebase Cloud Functions, I'll have a look at my upload file log here. And there I can't read headers of undefined at course. Yeah, because I got an error here. The course middleware does execute a function here, but actually the original request and response object are just edited. So that is my mistake Here also, I never changed this, which is correct because I should keep the original request, not rename this to request, just keep a direct query here. And the same for response. Use response, so res, and not the response we used before everywhere. Because course just appends to this original data. It doesn't replace this. So this is my mistake. Sorry for that. So let's quickly redeploy this and then test this again. So now the updated function redeployed. Let me try this again. And again, let's not rush this. It can take a while. So let's try sending this again. And now it's taking really, really long here. And you can see in the log that it started a function execution, but somehow it's not finishing here. Now, it will time out after 60 seconds. That's the default timeout. So you get no infinite running function costing you thousands of dollars. By the way, the basic execution, so couple of executions which are clearly defined in the official docs, actually more than just a couple, are free. So you can run your function quite a lot without paying anything. Only if you exceed that limit, you will have to pay. But again, you can find this in the official docs, and there on the pricing pages, it is described how often you can run your function in the free tier and from which point on it will cost you money. So here you can see it timed out after this 1 minute. The question, of course, is why did it time out? What's wrong here? Why doesn't this work? It actually has two issues, our function. One is here when we parse file requests, when we get incoming files. There we get the file path, but actually this is not a file path Busboy will automatically store the file in. It's a file path we can use to store the file in. So first of all, let's import another dependency, the file system package, which is a default node package, so we don't need to install it separately. And then in the file listener here, I will use that file Busboy detected and add the pipe method to do something to that file. And then I will use fs create write stream to basically stream the file content into a new file and pass file path as an argument. This will actually write this file to the system. Now that's one thing. Another thing is that Google Cloud Storage, whilst we could use it in our cloud storage trigger, in the HTTP trigger, it's not available, it's not initialized. We need to initialize it manually with the credentials of our Firebase project. Now we can do this easily by going to our Firebase project and then to the settings, project settings, and there to service accounts. There you can now download under Firebase admin SDK, you can download a private key which you need to initialize cloud storage. So you can click generate new private key and then store that in your project folder. So here in the functions folder. So now I added this file which holds my private key. And now in your Firebase Cloud function, you actually need to initialize your Google Cloud Storage a bit differently. You need to initialize it such that you can use it in every function. So I'll put it a bit further down, because before we import it, I'll add a new constant, which I'll name gcconfig for Google Cloud Config, where I will just specify the project ID, whoops, like that, make sure the casing is correct, project ID, which is just your Firebase project ID. I'll add it in a second, and a key file name property, which is just the name of that JSON file. Make sure to add .json you just generated and downloaded and stored in your project. So the project ID is something you can find in the Firebase RC file, for example. So I'll add this here also as a string. And this Google Cloud Config has to be passed to that function we execute here when we import the Google Cloud Storage package. I'll just pass this gcconfig object to it to initialize that. And with that, I now make sure that Google Cloud Storage also works in this HTTP trigger function and not just in the storage related cloud function. That is something you have to keep in mind. If you want to use the cloud storage package in a non-storage related trigger function, then you have to initialize it with your private key you downloaded from the Firebase console. Now with that, we're almost there, but there's one more thing we have to do. to kick off this whole busboy thing, after all our on listeners and so on, I also have to call busboy end and pass the request raw body to it. Raw body is a property provided to us by the Cloud Function itself, so to say, on the request object. And this simply, well, is required for busboy to work correctly and to start parsing or to parse all the request and trigger these on events. Now, with that, we're almost there. One more thing though. Here, in the upload then block, that's of course a mistake here. We just get a function here if we are successful, and if we would have an error, then we would actually end up here in the catch block. So that is where we then receive the error that we then in turn want to handle. We don't need an if statement here. We would just return our error response here. So just like this. This is the adjustment you need to make. This syntax where you get the error or the uploaded file reference, which you also could use here, that would only be relevant if you were to pass using an alternative way of using the upload function by passing a callback function where you then indeed have your error or the uploaded file. But if you use the promise approach as I do, you work with then and catch, of course. So sorry about that. And with that, let's deploy this Firebase function and let's see if with all these changes it works as it should. Now let's already do something else. Let's go to storage. And I already got some files in there, which actually are the files I will upload. So I will delete them to make sure that we really can see if that works, so that I got an empty storage. Now with that, I'll wait for this to finish and then we'll try out sending the same request again. And hopefully with that, storing a file on cloud storage through our Firebase HTTP triggered cloud function. Pretty advanced, I guess. Deployment finished, and as always, let's give this a few seconds before we send the request. And then in Postman, I'll send the same request again to Firebase. And I get back, it worked, which is looking good. Now on storage, I'll reload this, and actually there we should see two files now. We see the uploaded file and the resized one, because our other cloud function, which triggers upon file changes, and of course, this is a file change, it's uploaded, so this triggers the cloud function. The other cloud function also runs, so the resizing cloud function also runs, and here I can confirm by the date and time, this is today, so this works as it should. And with that, with some errors, we made it to the end of that. We have our upload file HTTP endpoint, which is triggered by an incoming request. We check the request method. We make sure that we would also be able to reach this from some web app, which uses a browser, which therefore makes sure that course is enabled. We do enable it here. We use busboy to parse the foreign data and parse any files, store them in a temporary folder. And then once we parse the whole request, upload it through the initialized Google Cloud Storage package. And then we, well, kick off this whole parsing essentially here by calling end and saying we're done reading in the request. Here's the raw body. Please do something with it. This is what's happening here. And I hope that despite the few errors we faced, which also might have been helpful, seeing some things to avoid, you learned how to set up HTTP endpoints through Firebase Cloud Functions and which extra flexibility this gives you. Now you can build your own RESTful API on top of Firebase. You can use all the other features. You can integrate this API with the other features like we do for storage. And you can add extra functionality that previously you couldn't add, easily at least.